While reflecting on very old religious writings, Carl Jung made a psychological observation that reaches far beyond the ancient texts he was studying, one that offers genuine comfort to anyone who has ever felt disturbed by finding sharply contradictory qualities existing within themselves at the same time. He noticed that certain very old descriptions of powerful figures depicted them holding together without any apparent tension or discomfort, qualities that would seem to a more reflective mind to be genuinely incompatible: insight alongside real obtuseness, loving kindness alongside real obtuseness, loving kindness alongside real cruelty, creative power alongside real destructiveness, all existing side by side with no evident conflict between them at all. Jung's psychological insight was this. He observed that this kind of untroubled coexistence of sharply contradictory qualities is only really possible under one particular condition, when little or no reflective self-awareness is actually present, or when that capacity for reflection remains weak and only occasionally active. In other words, a being or a person can hold genuinely opposite and contradictory qualities together without any felt tension only when there's not yet enough conscious self-awareness present to actually notice, examine, and feel troubled by the contradiction itself. Once genuine reflective consciousness enters the picture, this comfortable, untroubled coexistence becomes impossible to sustain. The contradictions begin to chafe against each other, becoming a source of real and sometimes painful internal tension precisely because, for the very first time, someone is actually watching closely enough to notice they are there at all. This observation offers something genuinely valuable and genuinely reassuring for understanding a particular kind of inner discomfort that many people experience but rarely understand correctly. If you have ever felt disturbed, confused, or even ashamed upon noticing sharply contradictory qualities within your own nature, genuine kindness existing alongside real capacity for cruelty, real wisdom existing alongside real foolishness, genuine creative impulse existing alongside real destructive tendency, Jung's insight suggests that this troubled noticing is not actually evidence that something has gone wrong with you. It is evidence of exactly the opposite. It is evidence that your own capacity for reflective self-awareness has developed enough to actually perceive contradictions that the less conscious version of yourself would have simply carried around without ever noticing or being bothered by them at all. This reframing matters enormously for how a person relates to this kind of inner discomfort. The natural instinct upon noticing troubling contradictions within your own nature is often to interpret this noticing itself as a bad sign, evidence that you are becoming more confused, more unstable, or more genuinely flawed than you previously believed yourself to be. Jung's understanding suggests almost the opposite interpretation. The very fact that you can now see and feel troubled by contradictions that previously went entirely unnoticed is itself a sign of psychological growth, not psychological decline. A less self-aware version of you would have simply continued holding these same contradictory qualities without any of the discomfort you are currently experiencing, precisely because that earlier version lacked the reflective capacity to actually perceive the tension between them. This does not mean that the contradictions themselves are comfortable to live with, and Jung never suggested that this kind of developing self-awareness comes without genuine cost. Living with a clear and honest perception of your own genuine contradictions, the real kindness and the real capacity for unkindness, the real wisdom and the real foolishness, all coexisting within the same single nature, is genuinely more difficult than simply remaining unaware of them entirely. But Jung believed this difficulty was the necessary and valuable cost of genuine psychological maturity, a fair trade for the clearer and more honest self-understanding that only becomes possible once reflective consciousness has developed enough to actually notice what was always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally look closely enough to see it. There is also something worth understanding about what typically happens next, once a person has genuinely noticed and begun to feel the tension of their own contradictory qualities. Jung believed that this noticing, however uncomfortable, was actually the necessary first step toward genuine integration, the patient, ongoing work of coming to terms with the full and complicated reality of your own nature, rather than either denying the uncomfortable qualities entirely or being overwhelmed and paralyzed by having finally noticed them. The discomfort of noticing is not the end point. It is the genuinely necessary beginning of a longer process, one that eventually allows a person to hold their own real complexity with far more honesty and far more genuine self-understanding than the comfortable but unconscious state that came before it. This offers a particular kind of reassurance worth returning to whenever you find yourself troubled by noticing real contradictions in your own character. Rather than treating this trouble as evidence that you have become somehow worse or more flawed, consider treating it instead as evidence that your own capacity for honest self-perception has simply grown sharp enough to finally see what was quietly there all along. The discomfort is real, but so is the growth it actually represents. Think honestly about a contradiction in your own nature that has troubled you, some combination of qualities that seem, on the surface, difficult to reconcile within a single, coherent self. Consider whether the trouble you feel about this contradiction might actually be evidence of your own developing self-awareness, rather than evidence that something has genuinely gone wrong. If you can identify a contradiction in your own nature that has troubled you, write below the single word for one side of that contradiction. Naming even one half of it honestly is often the first step toward the longer work of genuinely integrating both sides into a more complete and more honest understanding of who you actually are. Because the discomfort of noticing your own genuine contradictions was never, according to Carl Jung's careful understanding, a sign that something in you had broken. It was, he believed, one of the clearest and most reliable signs available that something in you had finally begun, for the very first time, to truly see.